Hello. In this episode, I show you the secret to achieving a perfect paint job. But be careful, this knowledge is dangerous. Hey, thanks for watching Paintucation by Kevin Tetz. We really appreciate you here on the channel. If you haven't subscribed, yeah, give it a shot, and we'll get you notifications as to what's coming up next. So I want to pose the question. It's a hypothetical question. How do you get a perfect paint job? Well, the answer is simpler than you think. What you need to do is create a perfect surface to apply your paint to. It's kind of that simple. The process, it takes a little bit more dedication and effort than that. So obviously, we fix dents, we prime the dents, we block the primer, and we put more primer, and then we sand it and prep and everything, and super oversimplifying the process. But I want to bring you up to speed in where this truck is. Obviously, the rest of the truck is in pieces and it's elsewhere. So what we did to get to this point is I went around and inspected every panel, marked out all the places that needed fixed or massaged. Took out all the trim, handles, stripes, anything that might be in the way, and went to work on the 40+ areas that needed blocking or filler. I did several tests on the newer paint job over the original red color, and it passed all the adhesion tests, so I felt safe working on top of it. After a few days of blocking and sanding, we got the truck in the booth and masked up and ready for the high build spray filler that I like to use as a second stage of my bodywork. This Evercoat polyester is super thick and gives us the layer of material we need to be able to flatten it out from the top down. This primer uses a 2.5 fluid tip, huge. You can see the filler repairs I have over the paint, and this is fine to do with the right body filler. But read your TDS sheets on the filler just in case. Make sure that it's okay and compatible to go over top of a properly prepped paint. For non-paint guys, it's one step away from just pouring it on, and we use nearly a full gallon of primer filler with 3 fat coats and about 10 minutes of flash time in between each coat. The pink color on this Evercoat primer ended up changing to gray after I left it alone for several weeks. I don't really know why it happened, but it didn't change any of the other characteristics of this product. And all of that work, weeks of work, gave us super flat and nice and straight panels that are ready for a high build product that's going to give us enough material to create the foundation for a really nice straight paint job. Which is exactly where we are with this particular piece of the puzzle. I'm going to keep going. So this is in our super high build polyester. Now, I did block the tops of the bed sides while the bed was down on jack stands. What that allowed me to do was to reach comfortably the tops of the bed rails to where I could manage my blocks and I could create what I wanted to create. I could see what I was doing quite literally, and I used a guide code and things like that. And I'm going to walk you through all of those steps. So what we're going to do here is block sand. So yes, that's an oversimplification. We're going to block sand, of course. Look at the shape of this thing. It's crowned and rounded here. And it's hard to tell because it's a big dang truck, but it also torpedoes down here. It narrows at the back. So it's crowned here. It's got a complex shape here. It crowns around here. There's a style line here. There's a flat zone here. This is a curved zone here. This is another flat zone here. We have a flat zone on top. Right here, it's a different shape, and right here, it's a different shape. We've got this inset thing, and this curves down underneath. There's a lot going on with this panel. So when I say things like I'm going to block the panel out, it doesn't mean I'm taking a 2x4 and smacking some sandpaper on it and just sanding like a moron. What that means is that I'm going to block sand properly, and I'm going to continue the process of shaping this panel. I just said it, back to what I said a couple of minutes ago. A nice paint job sits on a super nicely prepped surface. So my method for this is to treat everything like a zone. We have a zone here. We have a zone here. This is a zone. This whole entire space from here to here, all the way around here, is a zone. This flat part in here, another zone. This flat part here, another zone. Kevin, why aren't the curved parts zoned? They kind of are, but they tie in the different flat areas. So my strategy with blocking panels out that are complex shapes, which all vehicles are, spoiler alert, there's no flat panels on any vehicle. My strategy is to get my flat zones super flat first, and the corners take care of themselves. Yes, there's blocking techniques. I'll show you those techniques on how to properly round over a corner without making waves in it. But the way I approach something like this, or actually any panel, is to create my zones, understand where I'm going to work, and then I can go about blocking the flats. Make the flats flat. Start with the flat panels, and you don't even have to worry about these areas here. We have to respect them, but we can kind of sneak up on them afterwards. The most important parts of a finish of a vehicle are the ones that we see the best reflection, and those include all the flat zones. That's why I focus on that. It's the most important. Not that these inner coves aren't, but the flats are the most important. So there's my strategy. So we can block, and the first few strokes, it's going to show me a little bit of contrast in color, but you know me, I like to use the powdered guide coat and create a darker layer so that when I sand it off, it stays in the low spots and shows me where the high spots are. It's a surface analysis tool and allows me to really dial in the flat surface. So that's what we're going to do. What we're going to do it with is something that just in the last few years, and talking to people and talking to experts that know way more than me, I've learned some better ways to perfect a panel. So let's check out a couple of different sanding block options over here. We need to choose our tools carefully when we're block sanding a vehicle. So this is a sanding block, but its purpose is not to make a panel flat and straight. It keeps us from grooving out the panel. Not what we want when we're straightening out and flattening. This sanding block is a good block. There's nothing wrong with this block, but I don't use this to block sand my outer surface panels. Here's why. I can twist that, right? I can twist it this way. I can move it there. And this is an advantage sometimes. Then I can do that with it. And here's the other thing. I can push a dimple in with my finger. I can roll this edge back. If you want to create a flat surface, you have to use a flat surface to create it. It's a pretty simple rule, but it took me years to understand this and to really wrap my head around it, and it took some really, really fine craftsmen and experts in the field to teach me this. So this is a company called Next Level Blocks. I use these. Here's why. This, you can see, it's an acrylic sander. It does not flex that way. It barely bends that way. The edges are machined. They're very crisp and precise. I am never going to be able to push a dimple into that surface. This is as close to a piece of glass as that I'm going to get in creating a sanding block. Using a super flat tool on my surface is going to get me a super flat surface. Of course, technique comes in. But that's the first step is here. Use the right tool for the job, right? So I've got inline sanders, I've got DA sanders, I've got all the different things, and they're all great tools. But the purpose of this creating Z-Sled with a pickup bed, which is a super nice flat and straight glossy black paint job, is we got to get it flat before. So we're using this. Our grit strategy is we're going to go pretty dang aggressive. We've got 3 coats of the super high build polyester. So I'm going to start out, let's see, I'm going to start out with 120. And then my edges and other places, I might kind of knock some of the 180 grit scratches off with 220, but my high build polyester, or actually my 2K urethane, is going to tell me what it needs. So I memorized the TDS sheets on the urethane primer I'm going to use, and it says 180 to 220 grit. So we're in the family with 180. 220 is just going to make a lesser sanding scratch, and it's going to ask the primer to do less. So there's my strategy: 120, 220, guide coating in between each step. Let's go. So we're not just going to go at it blindly. We are going to load our block up and hit our panels. Treat the zones one at a time. And before we do any of that, I'm going to use my powder black guide coat and create a surface analysis tool, create a contrast to where I can see what the heck it is that I'm doing. It's black powder. I'm going to put a mask on. Just like that. And I'm not just sitting this on top, I'm working it down into the pores of the surface. All right, so you can already see that it's talking to me. You can see the difference in the darkness and lightness there. That's the guide coat sticking in the low spots. You can see texture there. I think there might have been some pinholes that I fixed in the poly, but it might have been a filler spot there. But it's talking to me. It's telling me what I need to do. And honestly, the guide coat is just another tool, but it's a really, really good one. Almost forgot this. Why didn't I prime this, Kevin? Why didn't you prime the rest of the roll? Because the sheet metal was nearly perfect. It was a very nice stamping, and I don't need to. I will spray it with the 2K, and we'll do our final surface prep on that. But yeah, you can see right here where my run was, and I fixed it with the tape. So we'll block the heck out of that, and lo and behold, it'll be nice and flat. So we're ready to start moving some powder from the bedside to the floor. I'm going to use more than one sanding block, and I'm going to show you a couple of different options here. These are the same size, but you can see a different thickness in the acrylic pad at the bottom. This one, the thicker one, obviously is going to be more firm. We've got something similar here. These are just, it's still a hard plastic, but just different sizes. These acrylic guys, obviously for detail sanding, maybe even color sanding, and this guy here. So, different shapes demand different sizes. We've got a bunch of different complex shapes on that bedside, so we're going to use several different blocks and kind of match the block to what we're trying to do in the panel. And we'll get more into that in a sec. I want to show you how I load my sanding blocks because it matters. I'm not just smacking the face into the adhesive. This is 120 grit. It's what we're starting with. Now we're going to move up to 220 grit. But I want to take advantage of this machined edge. This is super straight, super flat. So this edge here is also machined. It's machine cut. So when I'm loading this block, I'm looking and I'm trying to get it exactly lined up. I'm looking straight down on it. It matters. It matters because I use this edge of the sanding block when I sand. I'm usually blocking into that flat edge. It's not just the pad of the block that we use and take advantage of for a straight part and to recreate a flat surface. It's this leading edge too. So that block is loaded. This guy, we're going to load this guy as well. Now this paper is super close to being exactly the same width as this block here, but I'm still going to line up one leading edge. Bam, there it goes. If you look at this other side, we've got a bit of overhang right there. So I have a direction on this block. So I'm gonna be blocking in this direction, doing my X patterns. This guy here, the little acrylic guy, same thing. Line up one side, then it becomes a precision instrument instead of a big dumb animal. So, 2 stages of blocking on high build polyester. First round is 120 on the existing guide coat. Then we'll clean it off, re-guide coat, and do 220. 220 is still pretty aggressive, but it's going to diminish those 180 grit scratches and get us set up for the next round of primers, which is 2K urethane, and 120 is super aggressive. And with this flat face block and a super aggressive sandpaper and good guide coat and all that kind of stuff, we're going to get a nice shape hammered into that surface pretty dang fast. PPE is important. I'm wearing a dust mask, got eye protection, and I don't ever want to touch a surface that I'm going to paint, if I can possibly help it, with my bare hands. So I'm using gloves. It also keeps your hands from drying out, man, especially in the wintertime. Wintertime is really brutal on your skin, and you know, the ends of your fingernails crack, and then you look like Quasimodo that's drug himself through a rock garden, and you know, pieces of your flesh are hanging off, and it's just gross, man. Gloves, well, yeah, it'll help. So I'm taking this block. I find it really annoying to talk with that mask on. We take it a zone at a time. The first zone, the first flat, I'm going to take advantage of and dress down is this lip right here. I always like to start with a win. So you can see it. It's about, almost an inch wide all over here. Very inconsistent. I want to make it consistent. So I'm going to ride, that's going to be my first shape that I block out. So you can see what's happening here. It's giving me a pretty good idea right here. We've got a bit of heavy edge in that primer. That's a nice shoulder there. It gets weird there, gets weirder there, it's flat there, gets weird there. So our opportunity is to actually perfect this peak and make it better. So it's starting to get a little more consistent there. So this is where the guide coat becomes a tool as well. I'm going to reapply. So I've got a longer block now, and I need a longer block because it's a wider, flatter area. So now what I'm going to do is work down into that lower style line here, and I want to stay off of this edge, and I certainly want to stay off of that flat. So I'm just going to work a little bit at a time. Now I'm really working on my X pattern.
What I really like is how bouncy this bed stand is. That's just really nice when it's like a moving target like that. That's pretty cool. Block's loading up a little bit. Red pad unloads the block. So all these areas right here with the super flat, super hard surface, now you can see what that does. It's showing me where it's not flat. These would manifest into just a little bit of weirdness on the surface, and I want it flat. You can see I'm always traveling with it. I'm not just hammering on one spot because you can cup things out. So I'm moving down, working that flat. Everything is a flat spot. All we do is join them together. You see that edge starting to come alive. I want that nice and crisp, but my guide coat down here now shows me what I can sand into, right? That's starting to crisp up really nice, and I can feel it. I can feel that sharp edge with my fingertips. Another reason, wear your gloves, right? Switch sides. Now I'm going to work that edge. This is flattening out nicely. A little bit of weirdness there, but I'm going to work this edge. So this edge right here, we're reading it, and it's pretty consistent, and then it's a little weird there. I'm going to continue down, straightening it out. Now we're going to guide coat again. Now I'm going to work it from the bottom side. We use a longer block too, now that we've got the flatness kind of engineered into it. Yep, I messed up right there. See how that? I went over top. That's my stop sign. Made it inconsistent. We can come back and correct that as long as we've got enough material, and we do.
So now I'm happy with this. This is nice and flat. I can see it. My guide coat shows it. I want this peaked edge to be pretty dang crisp. Years and years ago at one of the PPG certification classes, an instructor showed me this. It wasn't even part of the paint training class. It was a car that he had on a rotisserie. Rotisserie? He had it on a rotisserie in the back, and he was his personal car that he was doing. And he was blocking out style lines, and he was making them sharp and crisp. And he used 3/4 inch masking tape. So I'm going to show you this technique as well. Just like I use the machined edge of the blocks, we're going to use the machined edge of the 3/4 inch masking tape because it's really consistent. Doesn't stick very well to dust, so you saw me wipe it off. The other thing about masking tape is that if you ask it nicely, it'll remain consistent. So it's ironically about 3/4 of an inch here. Look how nicely the tape lines up with that. So I'm going to pull the tape a little bit, and I'm lining it up with this bottom peak, or the bottom edge right there. I'm trying to make it toward this nice corner. The sharp corners are harder to do with the paper masking tape, but we can still get them. So if you see, I'm pulling and stretching the tape as I'm putting it down. That's the secret. I don't want the tape to tear on the top edge because that's going to be my guide for a nice super crisp style line. So being cautious. I'll get that together a little bit, so I'm going to try and keep it consistent. All right, so, all right there. We're going to just say, that's pretty close. Nope. See that little wow in there? Not good enough. I'm going to go ahead and do this edge again. All right. So now what I can do is take my sanding block and I can literally use that edge, that tape edge, to bump up against. And I can use that as my fence. That's what I call it. My fence as a guide to block up into that. And it'll literally keep me off of that flat area and crisp this edge up. More sanding.
You see what's happening right there? I'm hitting bottom, running out of material. That's my stop sign. That's the power of having contrast to be able to read it on the surface. So now we can see that shoulder crisping up right there. You can see how straight it is. So I'm going to come back. There's still places like that where I can see a little bit of texture. Right there, I want to shape it around a little bit more. So I'm going to guide code again. I'm just going to clean that shoulder up. And then we're going to take a look at it wet. All right, we're going to wet the dust off. We're going to wet check it. Don't get my face in this, just hands. This is just my wax and grease remover. I'll let that rest just for a second. So that's got the dust off of it. I'm blowing through my poly right there, but everything else I think I'm pretty happy with. So what I'm doing now is getting it wet with solvent. A solvent that stays wet for a long time. And I'm going to try and find some light to bounce off of it. So you can capture the reflection. You can see sometimes. And just like I'm dragging the camera over it, I would move my body so that I can see the reflection of that style line. So what I'm looking for is the quality of the reflection of the actual light bulbs. You can see them right in the middle of the frame. And I'm just moving my body and dragging that across. That's how we read the panel with a wet solvent. I can also see the style line and check how straight it is. The beauty of the wax and grease remover is that it stays wet for a really long time. All right, I can see that edge that I've sharpened up right there, mostly. Right here, can we see that? Can we get a reflection? Can I get a reflection? Give me a reflection. There's a little bit of one.
right there, right along that lip. You can see that. The wetness shows us what it's going to look like with a paint job on it. We get to see literally a lens into the flatness of the panel. That's why we use guide coat. That's why we wet check. And we use the super flat blocks to achieve our goal of having a super flat panel. Two things, kind of important. I don't ever want this to dry completely on the panel, so I always come back with a wiping towel and I'll wipe it off. The other thing is this. If it's a really bad idea to use a slow drying solvent on bare polyester filler, aka Bondo. The reason being is because it's very porous. Now this coating is porous too, but not quite like your spreadable fillers. They're full of micro pinholes and air holes, and it'll drink that stuff in. And it dries really slowly, right? So you don't want it to stay in there while you do another coating. So whenever I wet check, I always either blow it dry from the top surface and give it a few minutes, give it 5-10 minutes before I do anything else to it, especially another coat of primer. And don't ever wet check your Bondo. It's that simple. So now I'm pretty satisfied with this zone right here. Real time, I'm going to say I'm 30 minutes in to this arch. That's about right. It doesn't surprise me. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 18. We're probably going to have 4 hours into this panel. Okay, that's not bad. That's not bad. Combine it with the 10 hours that are in it previously, combined with the next session of primer and another probably 2 hours of surface prep, you're looking at about 20 hours average per panel to get it straight and ready to paint. So put that math in motion when you're really wanting to do a paint job that you're going to be, I'm not going to say that you're going to be proud of. If you're really wanting to do a paint job that uses these types of techniques to get it very flat, it just takes a time investment, that's all. This time I've got a 16-inch sanding block and it's loaded again with 120 grit. What I'm doing is going over top of the most obvious and flattest parts of the middle zone. I'm traveling with my X pattern using a cross-hatch method for blocking. One of the ways I've actually had to adjust my technique when using these hard-faced or acrylic-faced blocks is that I'm using a lighter pressure. If I bear down into it too hard, the solid edges and the really hard corners can dig down into the panel and create grooves. If I more skate over the surface, then the flatness of the block not only reveals through the guide coat that I'm making progress, but it also lets the flat part of the block do the work. This is a subtle adjustment in technique, but it is noticeable, and you'll get used to it.
All right, so you know what a guide code is by now. You know what it does. I just wanted to show you these zones. That's a low spot. That's a high spot. That's kind of pressed into the panel where it compresses down there, kind of wows in a little bit. These areas, this rounds over a lot right there. But you see how we're sneaking up on it, right? And this shape right here, it ducktails out right at the light. Can we completely get rid of that? Well, sure we can. It's going to take a lot more filler. Am I going to do that with this truck? Probably not, because this is a show driver. It's not a full-on, I'm not going for the Riddler Award or Truck Fest or anything like this. I just want it nice and flat. And we're working on nice and flat, but we're not nice and flat yet. We've got some work to do, and also here, I just want to point this out. I'm respecting this little cove in here. I'm going to finish that afterwards. I'm getting my flats, flat, flat, and then I'll get the not flats after that. Make sense? Okay, more working. So all of this is flattening out pretty good. I'm staying off of this top line. I'm going to make that into a style line. It's just a rolled edge now. But right here, I'm staying away from this. We'll come back and address that later. And all of this is flat, or my guide code is gone. So I want to talk about that. When your guide code is gone, stop sanding. There's enough sanding. Stop sanding. When your guide code is gone, then in theory, your top surface is flat. We're at 120 grit. It's very aggressive. So I can't do anything on that other than spray more primer on it. So I certainly can't paint on it. So we've got to come back with successive grits of sandpaper. 220 is next. So we have to have enough material there to be able to block down even further and get rid of all those 180 scratches. And from that point forward, it's a process of refinement. So anyway, I've got a shorter block because if I use my enormous block here, I can knock grooves into this area that I've worked hard on. So I'm going to use a shorter block, get into these areas a little bit better, and flatten this into this without damaging that. Flatten, more, damage, no. right here in this area, it's flat right there, but it's curved and curved. So guess what? This is from Next Level also. We have flat, curve, curve. And it happens to, by some miracle madness, fit in there. So guess what? We're blocking with this tool right in here.
Lower parts of the bed sides are flat panels, so I'm using a flat block again, 16 and the 12-inch blocks.
So I know you're asking the screen right now, Kevin, showed us how to block a flat part flat. That's fine. What about a curved part? What about a complex shape? Like this right here. Still guide coat, still filler. I can still feel inconsistency with it. How do we get that flat and straight? I've got a 2x4 here. It's a sanding block, but it's flat like a 2x4. So what do we do? So I'm not going to block the whole thing because I'm going to make a bunch of dust, but I want to talk to you without my mask on. So basically, in a nutshell, travel while you roll. So I'm going to do the sandpaper side, not on here. So let me show you the action. I'm rolling and I'm traveling. See how the block is moving constantly. I'm changing directions. What that's doing is instead of just sanding a flat spot in it, we're sanding a flatter spot on the radius. And at some point, when we change directions and travel up and down, everything joins together and flattens it out. I hope that makes sense. That's the way I see it in my brain. And I'll do a couple of strokes here with the sandpaper on. So see how I'm rolling? It even kind of resembles my X pattern. I'm going to roll back up using the flat footprint of the block, not the toe, not the side, the flat footprint. I'm rolling and traveling. And what I was just telling you that I felt, the guide code is now showing you. And you can put it together. You can see how me continuing that action along here is going to flatten it out. It's going to respect the actual crowned complex shape and bring it all down to the point where it's now guide code free. Now this edge here, look here. I'm leaving that sucker alone. That happens last. That's the easy part. Making the flat zones flat, there's your challenge. These things, yeah, a little bit more tricky, but you'll tie that in. So I'm happy with my flats. I got my flats flattened out. Now I've got all these edges that I'm going to deal with. And this spot right in here that hasn't really been blocked, but I've established a shape on either side of it. And that's what's important. These areas here, they're not going to take the light as much as these. The sample area that our eyes need to see it back and process the information is so much smaller on these areas right here. You want to go down the scientific nerd hole. It's literally spectral analysis on the part of our binocular vision and how we process the reflections and all that kind of stuff. But these areas here don't require as much, they don't give us as much information. So I'm not saying they're not as important, but they certainly require less attention because they're smaller. All right. So hey, Kevin, you've got all of these corners that are unsanded. All the flats are sanded, but all the corners are unsanded. What are you going to do? I am going to use Styline soft sanders. These sanding blocks have been carefully created using common style lines and angles from different vehicles. This in here is a super tight internal radius. There's a nice cove in here, all this kind of stuff. So that combined with this sandpaper, you see it's red oxide. It's different sandpaper than the other paper sandpaper that I was using because it's fabric backed. It's a more expensive sandpaper, but it's more versatile. And what I mean by that is that the paper backed sandpaper, when you put it on an edge like that, there's a really good chance that it's going to fracture
along the top ridge and create an uneven area. Whereas the fabric-backed Superflex paper from Styline doesn't do that. So we can do these crazy shapes with it. And what that allows us to do is to get in here to areas like that. See how nicely that fits in there? Oh, you can imagine there's sandpaper on there. See, so that will handle this whole radius, this whole round thing, as well as it's a long block, you know? And that is gonna get me, I've matched the shape. That's the most important thing. And up in here, I can translate that around and I can get that shape. So these blocks with their different shapes give us those options. So that's one of the reasons that I leave these till last, is because now I can deal with them as what they are and not even worry about these flats, because the flats are done.
So now we can just come in here, settle in, and just handles that radius super nicely. And I can roll around here. And it just builds that shape right into it. There we go. All right, that's done. I'm going to come up in here. I've still got some pretty interesting shapes here. And I'm using the hard edge of this along here and scooping, using my same X pattern cross-blocking technique, and I'm going to travel over this edge right here and smooth this out. Bring this flat into this flat and keep it flat.
So I've got everything blocked to 120. All the corners radiused. I used the different sanding blocks. I chased the edges with 180, and now we're ready to take a look at this thing. So I'm going to use my solvent again. This is the wax and grease remover. And this should give me a picture of what my new shape looks like. It's not really a new shape, is it? It's kind of like a refined shape. And you might see some crosshatch here and there. But here's another lesson. I wasn't happy with the way the lights were showing me the surface before. So this is the light I use for polishing. So I brought that guy in. So look at the fluorescent reflections right there. So I'm going to do this. This is how I sight a panel. I move my body just like I'm moving my camera. Look at that reflection. Look how straight that light is down here, all the way down here. We can drag that light, if my light will allow me. Yeah, there we go. What we're gauging, we know that's a 4-foot fluorescent grouping. If I see waves in that light, I know there's waves in the panel. If I don't, like I don't here, then I know my blocking technique has been good. And when I go here and I see the nice crisp style line around the wheel lip, and I see the nice cove there, then I know my blocking strategy has worked. And up here, if I see the nice style lines, the spectral highlights off the peaked edges, that tells me literally that I have properly blocked this panel out. So primer is flat, there's no reflection. A guide coat gives us a contrast, it gives us a visual aid. A solvent like this gives us an actual view of the panel. It's a lens into the panel. Powerful stuff, man. And it's humbling because you might think that you've got things flat, but if they're not flat, you're going to see waves in the reflection of the lights, and you're going to see ripples in the panel. And you know what? It doesn't lie. I'm looking at it here. I see some sanding scratches. I don't care. I'm after rough shape. This is literally blocking Bondo. It's just that the Bondo has been sprayed on. So if you lock that in your brain, then you know that we're still shaping. We're in the shaping process here. So if that makes sense, that's my strategy, and that's what we use on Z-Sled, and that's what we're using on Z-Sled with the pickup bed, and this happens to be the pickup bed. So I'm going to check the rest of it, and I'm going to wipe this solvent off before it evacuates, and we're going to check the rest of it. All right, so I'm going to soak this panel down. We're going to find the light. Good thing about this wax and grease remover is that it sheets out pretty quickly. While that's leveling out, I'm going to go ahead and do this. I want to look at this corner. All right, so this right here and this right here, that's body filler, and I blocked down through that. And you're saying to yourself, Kevin, you said don't wet down, don't hose down the body filler with the solvent, with the wax and grease remover. Well, I did say that, but what I was trying to say is don't trap it. It's going to be a couple of weeks before I paint this. So I'm not in any danger of burying that solvent in there. What I'm looking for, it's hard to see on this corner because my light's goofy, but I'm looking to see a nice shape, and I like that shape. You can't probably see it in the camera, but I can see it here. I can grab light from other places. But this around here is nice. Now I know that when I put my coats of paint on there, it's going to look good. And there's also, like I said, it's another stage of primer. All right, again, we're pulling our light down. You're not going to get much better of a reflection quality than that. I'm happy with that, man. I'm good with that. Now right here, this is the lowered truck. If this truck runs somebody over, then they might be able to spot a ripple in this panel, but it's pretty straight. Now right there, I see some grooves, right? Don't you? So that gives me something to think about. I'm going to make a note of that. My sections are good. My light reflection, the quality is good. These bedsides were not straight, folks. They looked shiny, but they weren't straight. So I'm good with all of that. That is my rough out shape, is what I'm going to call my rough out poly shape. So let's look a little closer. Can you see the crosshatch of my blocking? 120 is aggressive, man. It's aggressive. But it's aggressive because I'm in the shaping process. I'm not even close to thinking about paint. I'm shaping. I'm creating the surface in which the reflection and refraction will dance on. So I'm going to say a big fat mission accomplished with my first stage of blocking. When I move to 220, am I going to do anything different? Why would I? This worked. So now I've established my strategy. And spoiler alert, this was a strategy that I used on the cab before we got to this point. And it worked very nicely. So we've got to treat this in stages. We can't get too far ahead of ourselves. We have to stay in the moment. You got to stay in the procedure that you're doing. As much as I want to pour some paint into the gun and get a paint job on this thing and walk away, we're not there yet. I've committed to the process and we're going in. Next stop, 220. Then we're ready for 2K primer. We'll show you that part too. It's nice and straight. We wet checked it and it looks super groovy. More sanding, right? I've got my blocks loaded up with 220 now. And we're gonna reblock the surface. 220, of course, is a finer grit than 180. And we're gonna go through the same motions with the same process and the same strategy. I like the word strategy, because we've got a recipe that works. What we're doing now, we've established our shape with the coarse grit. And on a sprayable primer, even if it's spray filler like this, 120 is pretty coarse. So now we want to respect all that work that we did. So with 220, we're not trying to change anything. We might slightly improve the flatness, which is going to give us a more crisp DOI, or distinctness of image in the reflection. That's neither here nor there. We're just mostly taking out the 120 scratches with 220 paper. And if you're sanding fatigued at this time, know this going in. Sanding in finer grits is easier. It's not going to take as long a time. It's still a lot of work, still a lot of pushing a sanding block around, but it's not going to be the same amount of work as establishing our rough shape. A couple of reasons for this. Any paint film skins over and gets a little bit more firm on the top layer. Well, we've already broken down through all of that, so the material that we're blocking is not as hard. With the guide coat in place, 220 on the blocks, we're just going to go over everything we did. We're going to do the flats first, and I kind of like to have the same order. We're going to do the flats first, and then I'll come back to the corners and the rounds, and that is going to set us up for the next step, which is a different primer. Anyway, yeah. See? Fun. No, not fun. Work. So looking at this through your screen, I'm sure it just looks like I'm doing exactly the same thing. But when I talk about refining the scratches and using finer grit paper, I need a new glove, to get rid of heavier scratches, I want to show you exactly what I'm talking about. So if you look closely here, you can see those scratches. You can see the dark lines. That is the 120 scratch that's filled in with the guide coat, and that's what we're getting rid of. And when we sand down to here and we don't see those scratches anymore, they're gone. You can see some more here. And you can see this shoulder, that shadow right there. I'm respecting that line. I'm going to come and sneak up on that and perfect and correct that. But here you see it even more clearly, right? You see those scratches, being filled in with the guide coat. And then we're flattening them from the top down and replacing them quite literally with 220 grit scratches. At the same time as we're refining the surface, we're making it even straighter and flatter, while we're still trying to leave the shape that we've established already in it. It's a process of refinement, and that's exactly what I mean. So I just wanted to show you that. All right, change gloves, back to work. So the last step, I just took a piece of kind of worn out 220 paper and I just chased all the edges. And what I mean by that is I just, feeling it with my fingertips, another good reason to wear gloves, and just making sure there was no ridges, looking for any holidays, any places that I missed, any sand scratches coming through. It allows me to feel the surface as well as take a good look at the surface. I methodically worked my way from the back to the front. And now I can honestly say, not ever have to think about it again, that this panel is prepped to 220 grit. So, yeah, 220. Now we can safely go with our 2K urethane, put 3 fat coats of urethane on there, and then we can do our final panel prep. So that gets us to this point. So the cab, the tailgate, and the rest of the body panels are prepped with exactly the same strategy, with exactly the same methods. That way we have consistency from panel to panel to panel. I did pre-wash the cab and then left it dry overnight before I brought it into the booth to start masking. I masked a little bit differently, particularly on the door jambs, than I would for a regular paint job. We still have to be aware of overspray and how it can creep, but it's not going to be as super fine as a top coat would be. The secret to the cardboard trick is don't cut the panel. Use a fresh razor blade. It's very sharp. I stay about a 1/4 inch off of the surface to make sure I'm not cutting it from the other side. And I've just got a little bit more to do down at the bottom here, maybe about that much. There's that. And I don't like this up here. I can see a bit of a gap, so I'm going to stuff a little bit more down in there. And that'll keep my primer out. So now I've got everything sealed up. I don't recommend the cardboard trick when you're doing finish coats. Fibers can come off the cardboard and get into your top coats. It's not a great idea. So this is for primer only, I'm going to say, and it works very well for that. So the truck is reasonably clean. I've wiped it down before I started masking. So my masking tape will stick to the insides of everything. A layer of dust will keep your tape from sticking and it'll fall away and let overspray in through there. So we've pre-cleaned. We're going to clean again. Here's something that I don't want you to do. Hang on. This is paper towel. Don't use paper towel for your pre-cleaning. It's an amazing amount of lint and particles that come off of paper towel. It's not the right thing to pre-clean your body shop panels. Invest in yourself. Invest in your work. Invest in your paint. Get some body shop wipes. These are lint-free towels and they're designed to be applied along with cleaners on your pre-painted panels. It's not going to shed. It's very important. These are tack rags. Have they been used? Sure, they've been used. I save them after a paint job and I put them in a place where they're not going to get contaminated. And for a primer job, I'll use a tack rag a second and a third time. You can save yourself some money. We also have safety glasses, PPE. We've got two kind of pre-cleaners here. We've got a water base and a solvent base. Water base is blue, solvent base is red. These are from Axalta. Why do we do 2 stages of cleaning? Because there's 2 types of contamination. There's water-based contamination and there's solvent-based contamination. Solvent won't pick up organic contamination. Water-based cleaners won't pick up solvent contamination. So you got to do a 2-step process. So I'm just going to show you on one fender. Typically, it doesn't really matter what you start and stop with. Typically, I start with the water base. I'm just going to do this fender here. You want to wet the panel. Then you want to wipe in one direction. Roll your towel as you're wiping. Why is this important? These cleaners are designed to wet the panel fully, float the contamination up, and then roll it off in one direction. A little bit over spray on there is not going to matter. I'm just going to continue on with the hood. Done. Wet, dirty. Get another one. If you don't want to spend the money on those pump sprayers, you can go to a home center and you can get vacuum sprayers super cheap, less than $2 for a bottle. I've seen guys pour cleaners out of a jug onto their wiping towel. Half of it ends up on the floor. It's very inefficient. Good cleaners are expensive. You want to economize. I don't want you to compromise on quality anywhere. I don't want to spend money that I don't have to spend. But we can spend money wisely. And we can use these products efficiently. A quality job is not about spending a bunch of money on products and materials and cleaners. A quality job is about best practice, due diligence, crossing your I's, dotting your T's. Wait a minute. Crossing your T's, dotting your I's, and following the SOPs or standard operating procedures from your materials technical data sheet. TDS, remember that. Now I'll wait till the panels are completely dry and then we will wipe it with the solvent cleaner. I've got the booth on now. The reason it wasn't evaporating off of the hood is because there was zero air movement in the booth. It really helps have a little bit of air movement to evacuate. And look, check that out, you can see it. Now that we've got air movement, you can see the moisture that's left over on the surface going away. Look at this stripe here, even in that little cove. That's how important it is to have a little bit of air movement in your spray area. It's not just a good idea, the materials require it. Hang on. But it's super loud and annoying to try and talk to you with the booth running. So now that we're done with the water-based cleaner, we're going to come back with the solvent-borne cleaner. And what you're seeing here is not moisture on the surface, it's me having sanded through the clear coat into the base color. So now, our second stage of cleaner, guess what? Spoiler alert, exactly the same as the first stage of cleaner. We wet the panel completely, and I wipe the solvent cleaner off in one direction, rolling my towel. Why? Because the cleaners are designed to float contamination up so it can then be evacuated off of the panel. So that's it. I'm not going to bore you to tears. Rinse and repeat. Do every panel. I recommend doing one panel at a time and then moving on to the next in some sort of an organized format. So that's pretty much it. I'm going to come back and do this later, but I want to show you the primer that we're going to be using. Check this out. This is the high build primer surfacer that we're going to be using on Derek's truck. It's Nason XL. Nason is a budget-friendly line from Axalta. Derek and I had a philosophical discussion about this, and we both agreed that we wanted to show that you can get outstanding results using affordable materials. So I've mixed up my primer in a 4:1:1 ratio, and I typically mix about a quart at a time. According to my TDS, it's got about an hour's pot life, so I'm safe to mix it up and then come in and do my final tacking, which is the last thing you're supposed to do right before you spray. With the vehicle tacked off, I test my pattern on the wall and I start to come in and spray a wet coat of primer on the surface. Now, a wet coat doesn't mean a hammered on flooded coat. It means a wet coat, to where you've got a closed structure of droplets and a full wet coat. Don't overspray, don't overcoat, especially on the first one. Now, you can't really tell, but the direction of the airflow in my booth comes from the back of the rear of the truck and it pulls over the front of the truck. I'll explain why this is important in a little bit, but note that I'm a short guy and I've got step stools. I want to have a progressive coat over the hood, starting from passenger side going to driver's side, and sometimes it takes a little bit of creativity. So I got my step stools, and then I lean over and do the front. And then I work my way over the fender, completing my coat. When you look at my spray technique, you notice that my gun is pretty consistent in the distance away from the panel. I'm about 6 inches away, and my overlap is pretty tight. It's about 75%. What that means is that every time I make a pass, I move up 25%. So I get passed over 75% of the time. That sounds weird, but it's true. This allows me to get a wet coat, but a very even coat. With my faster travel speed, my tight distance to the panel and a 75% overlap, I can close up the structure on the primer and have a full wet coat that's distributed really even. I want you to rewind the video and look at the overspray. It's being pulled away past me into the exhaust filters. This also means that it's being pulled onto the wet primer that I've just sprayed seconds ago, instead of onto a dry panel. And that's important so I don't have a droplet structure that's grainy and crusty, and it's also important, and I'll never have to fight dry spray in my next coat. The second coat is exactly the same strategy as the first coat. Once you establish a pattern of spraying, duplicate it, follow it, repeat it. The third coat is exactly the same as the first and the second coat. This makes sure you've got a nice even layer of primer to do the next bit of preparation on. And that gets us here. And this is a 3-coat layer of a 2K urethane Nason primer surfacer. And what I'm looking at, you can actually read a flat surface as well. I can see the highlights here. My flats are flat, my panel gaps are consistent, all the little ridges and all these areas here that I just showed you how to kind of crisp up, they all look really nice. You can tell a lot with reflection of light, and I'm pretty happy with this surface right here. So this gets us to the point where now we can prep for paint. This is going to be a nice solid layer for our paint job to go down on top of, and if I don't blow through anywhere, then we won't even need a sealer. So the process from here, well, more blocking of course, but on a finer grit, and as you saw, the finer grit that we step up into, the less time investment that it takes. But we've still got one more opportunity to make this super flat, and we're going to take that opportunity. Now, that said, is this Chip Foose, Jonathan Goolsby, Randy Borcherding, show car straight? No, I'm calling this a show driver, which is what the Z-Sled paint job was. It's going to be really nice. The flats are going to be very reflective, but it's not perfect. Perfect, there's a long, expensive price to pay for perfect. Ring Brothers, they get it to perfect, and it's amazing to see that, but that's not what this truck is about. We want it super nice, and it's going to be black, and we want it like a black mirror, and it's going to be like that, but it's also going to be accessible enough time-wise to realistically conceive of putting a paint job like this on a vehicle that gets driven quite a bit, unlike a full-on show car. So the point of showing you this whole process is to show you the steps that it takes. A wise man told me a long time ago that we're only as good as our customers allow us to be. And what that means is that if you have the opportunity to follow through to the tiniest detail in every single step and stage, then you can achieve a practically perfect paint job. And it's up to you to set your goal between this point and that point. So anyway, hope you guys get something out of that, and the rest is just procedure, man. Paint ain't voodoo, it's just procedure. So thanks for watching, thanks for subscribing, and I think the notification bell's down there. And we've got more stuff coming your way. I'm so excited to be doing this, and thank you for watching. As long as you keep watching, we'll keep making videos. See you next time.